3,000 ft below the South China Sea, something sits perfectly upright in the darkness that shouldn't exist anymore. The USS Harder, the submarine that terrorized Japanese destroyers for 2 years, rests exactly where it died 79 years ago, with all 79 crew members still sealed inside. When the Lost 52 Project's autonomous underwater vehicles first captured images of the wreck in Music, 2024, maritime archaeologists couldn't believe what they were seeing. 0031, not because they found it, but because of how intact it was. The conning tower stands like a monument. The radar mast, that distinctive SJ setup, offset to starboard exactly where the 1944 blueprint said it would be. Even the ammunition lockers under the forward gun deck remain sealed. But there's something else down there. 0052, something that's been waiting in those dark compartments for 8 decades. The question isn't how we found the Harder after all these years. The question is what we're still afraid to look for inside a submarine that changed the course of the Pacific War and then vanished in a way that still doesn't make complete sense. 0111, because when you study the damage patterns on that hull, when you see exactly where those Japanese depth charges tore through the boat, you realize something unsettling. The crew had time. Not much, but enough. Enough to make decisions. Enough to fight back. Which makes you wonder what those final radio transmissions said. The ones still trapped inside Music, that wreck along with everything else we're not allowed to touch. 0137, the submarine that hunted hunters. The USS Harder wasn't just another submarine in the Pacific Fleet. When it slid down the ways at Electric Boat Company in Groton, Connecticut in August 1942, it looked identical to every other Gato-class submarine rolling off American production lines. Same 312 ft length, same diesel-electric propulsion system, same 10 torpedo tubes. 0204. But by the time Commander Samuel David Day took command, the Harder was about to become something unprecedented in naval warfare. A submarine that actively hunted the ships designed to kill submarines. Most submarine commanders in 1943 lived by one unbreakable rule: avoid destroyers at all costs. These fast, heavily armed escort ships were specifically built to hunt and kill submarines. 0228. They carried depth charges, sonar equipment, and the speed to run down any submarine trying to escape on the surface. Standard submarine doctrine was simple. If you see a destroyer, dive deep and run silent until it passes. Deal through that doctrine out the porthole. Instead of avoiding destroyers, he developed what became known as the down-throat attack. 0254. While other submarines fled, he would turn directly toward approaching destroyers and fire torpedoes head-on. It was tactically brilliant and psychologically devastating. Japanese destroyer captains trained to hunt submarines suddenly found themselves being hunted. The results spoke for themselves. During the Harder's second war patrol in August 1943, Day sank 5 merchant ships totaling over 25,000 tons. 0322. But it was what happened during the attacks that set the Harder apart. While other submarines took single shots and disappeared, his crew would surface during daytime attacks using their deck guns to finish off damaged vessels. They painted "Hit 'em Harder" on the conning tower, but this wasn't swagger. It was psychological warfare. 0346. By early 1944, Japanese naval intelligence had identified the Harder as a priority target. Destroyer squadrons received specific orders to hunt down the submarine with the aggressive commander. But instead of making DIY more cautious, the attention seemed to fuel his tactics. During the 4th patrol in March 1944, the Harder achieved something unprecedented. 0408. They sank the destroyer Ikazuchi using a point Music blank down the throat shot, then surfaced to rescue a downed American pilot while Japanese aircraft Music circled overhead. The rescue operation revealed something crucial about the Harder's crew. While under attack, they maintained the discipline and coordination necessary for complex surface operations. 31, these weren't cowboys. They were a precision instrument of naval warfare, operating with a level of tactical sophistication that impressed even their own submarine command. But there's something else buried in those patrol reports, something that naval historians are still debating. The Harder success rate wasn't just about tactics. 0451, it was about persistence. Dealey's crew conducted longer patrols, took more risks, and engaged more targets than any comparable submarine, which raises an uncomfortable question. What was driving them to operate beyond normal human endurance limits? Because by the spring of 1944, as the Harder prepared for its fifth patrol, DIY had already completed more consecutive combat missions than submarine doctrine recommended. 0518. And yet, when the call came for the most dangerous mission yet, disrupting Japanese naval operations before the Battle of the Philippine Sea, Do and his crew volunteered immediately. The 4 days that changed everything. May 1944. The Pacific War was reaching its climax and American intelligence had identified a critical vulnerability in Japanese naval strategy. 0543. Admiral Jizaburo Ozawa's mobile fleet was concentrating at Tawi-Tawi in the Philippines, preparing for what would become the Battle of the Philippine Sea. But Ozawa's fleet was protected by destroyer escorts, the very ships designed to hunt submarines. Most submarine commanders would have approached this mission with extreme caution. Not Dealey. 0604. The Harder's fifth patrol began on May 26, 1944, with orders that seemed almost suicidal: penetrate deep into Japanese-controlled waters and attack destroyer formations directly. What happened next became the most successful submarine patrol in Pacific War history. June 6, 1944. While Allied forces were landing at Normandy, the Harder encountered its first target, the destroyer Minazuki. 0632. Instead of the standard approach, DIY ordered a surface attack in broad daylight. The Minazuki, confident in its ability to outrun and outgun any submarine, turned directly toward the Harder. It was exactly what De wanted. At 1,000 wide, the Harder fired 3 torpedoes in a perfect spread. The Minazuki exploded and sank in under 4 minutes, but DIY wasn't finished. 0658. Rather than diving and fleeing the area, he ordered the Harder to remain on station, hunting for more targets. Japanese naval doctrine called for destroyer formations to respond immediately to submarine attacks with coordinated depth charge patterns. DIY was counting on it. June 8th, the destroyer Hayanami arrived to investigate the Minazuki's last known position. 0723. Naval records show the Hayanami sonar operators detected the Harder at maximum range and immediately began an attack approach. Once again, DIY turned directly into the threat. The down-Thethroad attack succeeded. Hayanami broke apart in all hands. June 9th, the destroyer Tanakaz, accompanied by 2 escort vessels, swept the area where 2 destroyers had already disappeared. 0748. By this point, Japanese naval intelligence knew they were dealing with a single submarine operating with unprecedented aggression. The Tanakazi's captain, following standard anti-submarine doctrine, began a systematic depth charge pattern to force the submarine to the surface. What happened next defied every principle of submarine warfare. 0809. Instead of seeking deeper water, De brought the Harder to periscope depth and waited. Music. When the Tanakazi closed to point-blank range, confident the submarine was trapped, DIY fired 4 torpedoes simultaneously. The Tanakazi's explosion was visible from 20 m away. In 4 days, the Harder had sunk 3 destroyers, a feat unmatched by any submarine in any navy. 0835. But the strategic impact went beyond ship counts. Admiral Ozawa, deprived of critical destroyer escorts, was forced to abandon his base at Tawi-Tawi earlier than planned. This premature departure disrupted Japanese timing for the Philippine Sea engagement and contributed directly to their devastating defeat. SS-257, naval historians still debate how one submarine crew sustained this level of combat effectiveness. The official reports describe textbook execution of advanced torpedo tactics, but submarine veterans who have studied the patrol logs notice something else: signs of extreme fatigue masked by adrenaline and combat focus. Consider the timeline. 09/18. The Harder had been at sea for over 2 weeks when the destroyer engagements began. Submarine crews during extended patrols typically showed decreased reaction times and impaired judgment after 14 days. Yet this crew was executing complex attack sequences with mathematical precision. Either they were operating at superhuman levels or they were functioning on something beyond normal human endurance. 09/42. The answer might be buried in those sealed compartments 3,000 ft below the surface. Because when the Harder returned from its 5th patrol on July 3, 1944, something had changed. Crew rotation schedules show several requests for transfer that were denied due to operational requirements. More troubling medical reports indicate increased sick bay visits for stress-related symptoms. 10/06. But instead of rotating the crew, Submarine Command made a different decision. The Harder was too valuable, too effective to sideline. On August 5, 1944, just 1 month after returning from the most successful submarine patrol in naval history, Dealey and his crew departed on their 6th mission. 10/28. It would be their last, the final hunt. August 1944, the Philippines were burning. American forces were preparing for the largest amphibious assault since D-Day, and Japanese defenders were desperately trying to reinforce their positions. Into this chaos, Submarine Command sent the Harder on one final mission: operate in a coordinated wolfpack with USS Hawk and USS Harder to interdict Japanese supply lines around Luzon. 10/56. But this patrol was different from the beginning. For the first time, the Harder wasn't hunting alone. Wolfpack tactics required precise coordination between multiple submarines. Split-second timing, shared target information, coordinated attack sequences. It demanded the kind of seamless teamwork that only comes from crews operating at peak efficiency. 11/19. The problem was that DE's crew had been operating beyond peak efficiency for months. 6 consecutive combat patrols, no rotation, no extended shore lead. By August 1944, the Harder's crew had been in continuous combat operations longer than submarine doctrine recommended. They were still effective, perhaps even more lethal than ever. 11/43. But they were operating in a psychological state that naval medicine was only beginning to understand. The first 2 weeks of the patrol proceeded normally. Working with Hake and Hato, the Harder sank 2 Japanese frigates, Matsuo and Hibari. The attacks demonstrated the same precision and aggression that had made the 5th patrol legendary. 12/05. But veterans who served on other submarines during the same period noticed something in the radio communications. The Harder's transmissions, while tactically sound, carried an edge that suggested extreme operational tempo. August 24, 1944, the Wolfpack received intelligence about a small Japanese convoy moving along the coast near Dussel Bay, Luzon. 12/27. The convoy consisted of 2 submarine chasers, CD-22 and PB-102, along with minimal escort. By Wolfpack standards, it was a routine target, exactly the kind of engagement that had become second nature to Dealey's crew. But routine is where fatigue becomes deadly. Standard Wolfpack protocol called for coordinated attacks from multiple angles, with each submarine taking assigned targets to avoid mutual interference. The plan was textbook. 12/56. Hake and Hato would engage the escorts while Harder targeted the primary vessels. At 10:30 hours, the attack commenced exactly as planned. Harder fired 3 torpedoes at close range. 2 missed. 1 struck CD-22, but the damage wasn't fatal. In any normal engagement, this would have triggered immediate evasive action. 13/19. Dive deep. Clear the area. Reposition for another attack. Instead, they ordered the Harder to maintain position for a follow-up shot. It was a decision that veteran submariners still debate. Some argue it demonstrated his signature aggressiveness, the same tactical audacity that had made the Harder legendary. 1340. Others suggest it reflected impaired judgment from extended combat operations. What's certain is that it gave the Japanese submarine chasers exactly what they needed, a stationary target. CD-22, though damaged, was still capable of launching depth charges. At 10:45 hours, Japanese records show a pattern of 6 440 lb charges dropped in a precise grid around the Harder's last known position. 14:06. Most submarine depth charge attacks were hasty affairs, rapid drops while moving at high speed to avoid torpedo counterattacks. This was different. This was methodical. The first charges exploded simultaneously at 150 ft, exactly the depth the submarine would use for a follow-up attack. The Harder, caught in the center of the pattern, took multiple direct hits. 14:28. But here's where the story becomes puzzling. Instead of catastrophic flooding in the forward compartments, the typical cause of submarine loss, the fatal damage occurred aft of the conning tower. Why does that matter? Because aft of the conning tower is where the submarine's command and control systems were located. 1449. The plotting table, radio equipment, sonar station, everything they would need to coordinate an emergency surfacing or damage control response. The location of the fatal damage suggests that whatever happened in those final moments, the crew lost their ability to fight back almost immediately. He and Hato, monitoring radio frequencies, heard the Harder's last transmission at 10:47 hours. 15:13. It was a standard damage report. Flooded compartments, loss of electrical power, attempting emergency surface, then silence. What followed was a mystery that wouldn't be solved for 79 years. Secrets on the seafloor. June 2024. Dr. Tim Taylor and the Lost 52 project team were reviewing sonar data from their latest Philippines expedition when something appeared on the screens that changed everything. 1540. At coordinates 15-43E, more than 3,000 ft below the South China Sea, their autonomous underwater vehicles had detected a large metallic object sitting perfectly upright on the seafloor. Initial sonar returns suggested a submarine, but the condition was unprecedented. Most World War II submarine wrecks are found on their sides or severely damaged from the forces of sinking and seafloor impact. 1609. This vessel appeared to have settled gently, as if it had descended under some form of control when the first high-resolution images arrived via ROV cameras. The identification was immediate. The distinctive Mod 3 conning tower fairwater, the unique SJ radar mast offset to starboard, the 76-deck gun still in position. 1633. Every detail matched the technical specifications for USS Harder as configured during its 1944 overhaul at Mare Island. But it was what the cameras revealed about the wreck's condition that stunned maritime archaeologists. The Harder sits completely upright on its keel, as if it had been deliberately placed there. The conning tower where DI and his officers would have coordinated their final battle remains intact. 1701. The periscopes are still extended. Most remarkably, the bridge door, designed to be watertight during combat operations, appears to be open. Advanced photogrammetry techniques allowed researchers to create detailed three-dimensional models without disturbing the W sight. What they found contradicts standard assumptions about submarine warfare casualties. 1723. The massive hole in the portside hull aft of the conning tower shows clear evidence of depth charge damage, but the blast pattern suggests the charges detonated while the submarine was already at significant depth, not during a surface or shallow water engagement. This raises uncomfortable questions about the Harder's final moments. 1744. If the submarine was deep enough to take depth charge damage in that specific location, Why was it holding position instead of executing evasive maneuvers? The damage pattern is consistent with a submarine that was somehow unable to respond to the attack, whether due to mechanical failure, crew incapacitation, or tactical misjudgment. 1805. Even more puzzling is the wreck's final position. Computer models show that a submarine suffering catastrophic hull breach at depth should tumble as it sinks, coming to rest at random angles determined by current and seafloor topography. The Harder's upright position suggests either incredible luck or that someone was still controlling the boat's descent even as it flooded. Dr. Samuel J. 1829. Cox, director of the Naval History and Heritage Command, described the discovery as providing closure and answers. But for families of the 79 sailors in TM bed inside, the wreck raises more questions than it answers. Because as a designated war grave under the Sunken Military Craft Act, no investigation of the interior compartments has been attempted. 1854. This means everything that happened inside the Harder during its final minutes remains exactly as it was on August 24, 1944. The radio logs that would explain that last transmission, the plotting charts that would show the crew's understanding of their tactical situation, the personal effects and duty stations that would reveal who was where when the depth charges struck. 1918. Most haunting of all, the sealed compartments almost certainly contain the remains of sailors who were still fighting to save their boat when the lights went out forever. The Harder's motto was, "Hit them harder." But the wreck forces us to confront what happened when the hardest-hitting crew in submarine history finally met their match. 1938. Contemporary submarine veterans who have studied the photogrammetry data notice details that don't appear in official reports. The ammunition lockers remain sealed, suggesting the crew didn't have time for a prolonged surface battle. The radar mast configuration indicates the Harder was set up for nighttime operations. Yet, the attack occurred in broad daylight. 2002. Most significantly, the open bridge door suggests someone attempted an emergency surface procedure, standard protocol when flooding threatens the entire boat. But emergency surfacing requires precise coordination between multiple crew members across different compartments. The depth charge damage to the command and control area would have made such coordination nearly impossible. 2024, which brings us back to the central mystery. How did a submarine crew cut off from their command center and taking on massive flooding manage to control their boat's descent to the seafloor? The answer lies somewhere inside those dark compartments, along with 79 American sailors who have been waiting 79 years to tell their story. The price of being harder today. 2047. The USS Harder rests in eternal patrol beneath the South China Sea, its hull serving as both monument and mausoleum to submarine warfare's highest achievements and ultimate costs. The wreck site, protected by international maritime law and designated as a war grave, represents something unprecedented in naval archaeology, a perfectly preserved snapshot of submarine combat at the moment of ultimate consequence for the families of the 79 sailors.